Hello, and welcome to today's webinar. We're glad that you could join us to spend some time today reviewing and going through the Diversity Abroad pre-departure training module. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping notes. On the right-hand side of your screen, you will see a dashboard. It's that gray modular-looking thing on the side of your screen. Here, you'll be able to ask any questions at any point during the presentation. We'll provide some specific time at the end of the discussion and the overview to respond to questions and comments, but please feel free to add any questions as we go through the presentation content. I'd like to note that everyone's mic today is muted, so the primary way that we'll be responding to questions will be through the dashboard. Before we get started, I did want to just make a note that today's discussion will be focusing on the content for the pre-departure learning module from the perspective of the advisors and professional staff who work with students and not specifically for students. So I just wanted to make that note before we hopped into the content. So thank you again for making some time to sit with us and go over our pre-departure learning module. As many of you know, we announced the release of this module earlier during the fall semester, and we're excited that we now have an opportunity to walk through the material with you all today. So to begin today's discussion, I wanted to go over just a handful of goals that we have for today's webinar. So essentially, we will be providing a general overview of version 1.0 of the online pre-departure learning module. I wanted to highlight the version 1.0 that I'll discuss a little bit later, but that is there for a reason. We will also be exploring how to access the content for those of you who are currently at a member institution. We will be reviewing portions of the content live, so I will give you a brief demonstration of what the pre-departure module looks like when you are able to access that. And then we'll provide some space to discuss the implementation strategies and options for Diversity Network members, member institutions, our provider members, as well as non-members. If there are other things that you would like to cover today, please feel free to add those into the questions box at any point. So I did want to give just a brief overview of who Diversity Abroad is. It does help to give some context for how the pre-departure module was developed and how it is structured. So Diversity Abroad is an organization that essentially connects students, underrepresented students, and young graduates to internationally focused internship opportunities, volunteer, career, any type of international experience that you can think of. I like to think of Diversity Abroad in two different divisions. We have our student-centered services as well as our professional network consortium. The student services essentially involves our diversityabroad.com website that provides free and open resources to students who identify from diverse and underrepresented backgrounds. We also have our Go Global Campus Tour that we do in partnership with a whole number of different providers and institutions where we visit campuses throughout the United States to provide information to students. So we won't be focusing on the student services side of Diversity Abroad right now. We'll be focusing on the Diversity Network, which is the consortium side of the work that we do. The network is essentially a group of institutions and organizations that have a commitment to diversity and inclusion in international education and exchange. A lot of the work that we do is really centered on these three goals of increasing access to international programming to U.S. students, implementing diversity and inclusive good practices in international programming, and serving the unique needs of diverse inbound and outbound students. So again, I just wanted to provide a brief overview for those of you who may not know all of the work that Diversity Abroad is involved with, and provide some context for how the pre-departure module started. The pre-departure learning module is essentially a tool that focuses on a student's inward journey. I think it's safe to say that most of us are comfortable with the fact that study abroad, interning abroad, teaching abroad, any type of international experience is an opportunity for personal growth and learning from the student's perspective. And while we do recognize that there are a number of resources that prepare students for logistical considerations, the practical considerations of going and spending some time outside of their home country, we realized that there weren't enough resources that were focusing on the inward journey, and how identity could possibly influence a student's or young person's experience abroad. So the genesis of the pre-departure module really came to be as a result of discussions with practitioners in the field, folks and advisors who work with the students on a day-to-day basis, to essentially help identify ways to help support students think in thinking about how their own personal identities, whether that be outward identities or inward identities, influence what their experience on the ground might look like. So the content of the pre-departure learning module was developed by a committee of professionals and experts in the field who have long experiences working with diverse student populations. So we brought together a group of 7 or 8, I don't remember currently, a large group of folks to develop the content in each of the different areas that you'll see in the subsequent slides. I do want to emphasize, going back to the version 1.0, that the content development is an ongoing process. So as this is a very first step in the implementation of diversity and inclusion as a pre-departure tool for students. And while this is an exciting tool, we also recognize that there are areas and opportunities for growth as we build out additional versions of the module. So as you and your students are going through this, please feel free to continue to provide feedback for subsequent versions of this. We are, again, excited that this is finally off the ground, and look forward to having your students provide some critical student feedback from that vantage point. So the pre-departure module is essentially structured in a way that highlights a whole number of different aspects of identity that our committee felt were particularly important to the study abroad experience. The pre-departure module starts off with a broad overview of what identity and culture abroad might look like for students who are going abroad. And this is actually a really good point to mention, that the purpose of this module is certainly not just to focus on students who might identify from diverse and underrepresented backgrounds. The genesis for the pre-departure module is that all students explore how their differing identities and intersecting identities might influence their experience. So this is certainly a tool that could be used for all of your students, and we would encourage you to let for those of you who are using this with your students, to encourage students from all backgrounds to access this resource. So there are 6 different areas of focus that the pre-departure module focuses on. Like I mentioned, we have a general overview and welcome to the students that starts off by discussing what the pre-departure module is intended to do, and then outline the next components of what the module includes. The module then walks through these 6 different identities that were defined by the committee to essentially go through different content areas, walking students through questions, providing them additional resources, including videos and articles, outside articles for students to consider in each of these different areas. Race and ethnicity is included here, gender, religion, socioeconomic status, sexuality, and disabilities. So here is where I am actually going to walk us through what the module looks like. For those of you who may already have access to the module, we are hosting our module on an outside platform called Articulate Online. And this platform essentially allows you to have a general email address that you can associate with the account with a general password. At that point, anyone who has the email and the password can access the content. Once you get into the system, this is the screen that you'll see, and you'll then be able to launch the content into this. And I'll be quiet now because I think we will hear the voice of the narration. And it sounds like the narration isn't coming through on the webinar, but there is a narration that walks that goes along with each of the different slides after it's launched. So the welcome welcomes the student into the section, and then you'll see on this left-hand side of the toolbar that there are drop-down menus for the subsections for each of the sections. So as I mentioned, it walks through the different this so it will start. I'm sorry, I had to pause because the narration started going. It essentially then outlines what the topic is and will give students the opportunity to go through or click on these different areas and go over what the next steps will be for those sections. And as I mentioned, each of the sections has subsections that we'll go through. And for each of these broad areas, there is an overview at the beginning. There are activities that include questions for students to consider, and then resources at the end of each section for students to do additional investigation afterward. And I will just show you where one of those areas is. So you'll see that on this slide that it's asking the students to actually walk through and respond to what one of these areas would actually best represent them. And after the student clicks on on one of the sections, it will pop up with an additional prompt to provide additional context for what the student might experience in that country. So this is just one example, but each of the sections has something that is similar to this. And you all can't hear it, but as you're walking through this, the narration continues and it will actually read out the content on each of the areas, which brings me to the next focal point of this resource. As I mentioned that there is narration, there is also a transcript of the narration that students can go through in the case that either the audio isn't working or the student might be hearing impaired and needs additional resources to view the content. The narration is provided in transcript view already. So that is just a brief overview of the content. And we will go back into some of the discussion of strategies for implementation and options for moving forward. I promised the overview would be quick so that we could provide substantial space for questions and answers. So the pre-departure module is in its entirety could take anywhere from 60 to 75 minutes depending on how long each of the individual users spends on each slide, how long it takes to read articles or go through the video links that are included there. We have gotten feedback that it may take longer if students decide to peruse some of the additional resources that are included at the end of each of those sections. But a good estimate is anywhere from an hour to an hour and 15 minutes to complete the entire module. This is a really great way. One way that we've identified that could be used as a model for implementation is to integrate the pre-departure module into an existing course, maybe that takes place the semester before a student goes abroad, or an existing orientation as complementary material to what's already being covered. The other way that this module could be implemented, and is likely the way that most folks will choose to implement it, at least initially, is to suggest to students to go through each of the individual sections. And the sections can take anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes to go through. As I mentioned, it includes prompts, questions, readings, and in some cases video links, brief video clips for students to consider in each of those areas. So essentially the student would come into the system, log in, and then choose the section that they feel most comfortable or appropriate for going through at that point in their process. So those are the two different ways that we've identified for completing the module, but we would love to hear how others have implemented their strategies on campuses and within their organizations as well. So accessing the pre-departure learning module is not too tough. For member institutions, this is included in the annual membership fees that the institution pays. And essentially, as I mentioned, since the module is hosted on the outside platform, you would provide us with a general email that you wouldn't mind anybody using and accessing, where we would then input that into the system, and you would automatically gain access and come in and have the opportunity to change the password based on whatever it is that you'd like to provide to folks. Once that is set up, you have automatic access to the content, and you would see that screen that I showed you before. For non-member institutions and for our provider members, there is also the option to just go with the annual subscription fee of $349 for the year. It is an annual subscription from June 30th to July 31st. July 1st to June 31st of each annual year. And that would give you the access to the content and to provide general distribution to any of your students that are either at your institution or going on your programs. So that is the brief overview that we had planned for today's webinar. This is the time that we wanted to allocate for additional questions from the audience. If there were places that you would like to revisit in terms of the slides, we can also hop back into the live version if that's something that you'd be interested in exploring as well. So as I mentioned, that gray dashboard on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll be able to type in any questions that you may have, and I'll give folks just a couple of minutes to put those in as they come through, and I'll hop back to the live version of it just so you can see what that looks like again. And we have a question about how to set up the account information for member institutions. Yes. So all we would need from you, what you would do is you would essentially send an email address, a general email address. Many of our institutions have chosen to use either their info at or their study abroad at email addresses for this particular purpose. You would send that email address to us. We would set it up in the Articulate online system, and then you would be able to generate a generic password for folks to access. So then once you're getting to the distribution point where you're connecting the information to your students, you would just provide your students with the email address and the password to get into the system. And the platform, the link to the platform is also located on the pre-departure discussion webpage in the network. We can also send that out post-discussion, post-webinar as well, just so that you have access to that. Thank you. Good question. We have a question about whether or not it's possible to view who has accessed the orientation through your account. Currently, you're not able to view who has access to the orientation, but you can see how many folks have accessed the orientation and how long they spent in the system. We are working on identifying a more individual based account system where we can actually set up individual student accounts. We haven't gotten to that point yet, but as soon as we do, we'll definitely implement that because we know that that is an important aspect of tracking student progress. But yes, currently, right now, you can just see how many people have accessed the resource. And we have another question that asks, does the module provide information for specific countries or regions participants are going to? We have a couple of different areas that don't necessarily focus on so I'll actually go, let's see if I can find the space where it is. We have an area in each of the sections that talks about different ways in which these identities might be perceived in different regions, but not specific countries. And I think in the race and ethnicity section, we actually have a section that's dedicated to talking about what, not what country they're going to, but in what way they would be associated in that particular country. So whether they're a minority going to a majority space or a majority going to a minority and that kind of thing. There's also a resource that takes students to outside resources in, I believe it's the CIA fact book to do some outside research on if they don't know what they'll be walking into, some basic information about the demographic information for their countries and regions where they'll be going. Does that respond? Did I get to all of did I respond appropriately to each of the questions that you all posed? I just want to make sure that there weren't any lingering questions. Great, thank you. So we'll give folks just another minute or two to see if we have additional questions. Now I can go ahead and just hop around just to hop around in the system just so you all can see some different views of what this looks like. So for the question about the regions in the country, you'll note that this is one of the ways in which students can interact with some of the outside resources. So it looks like we don't have any additional questions. At any point, I'll bring the slide back up. At any point, if you have questions, you are welcome to contact us at our general email, or you can contact me, and of course, this would be giving me trouble. You can also contact me directly. My email is lmcgee@diversityabroad.org, and I'll chat that out to everyone just so that you have it on hand as well. And I would be happy to discuss further additional questions that you might have, or get you set up in the system for getting you started with your group. So we did have a question from someone who was asking if there's a way for non-members to preview the module to assess the value for the annual fee, and that's a great question. We can provide temporary access for a couple of days where you and your colleagues could access it for 2 to 3 days. And you could take some time to walk through that and get back to us. And then at that point, we'd shoot you just a quick note to let you know that when we would be deactivating the account so that you could prepare to review the material. Great question. Thank you for asking that. Excellent. So for those of you who are interested in that temporary access, you can also connect with me directly or shoot an email to the members at email, and we'll be sure that temporary access is initiated. So thank you all for joining us for today's webinar. We appreciate your time and consideration. As a note, the slides for this webinar will be made accessible to everyone afterward, as well as a link to the recording. We'll also post a link to the recording of this webinar on our website, so that your colleagues who may not have been able to attend will also have the option to review a preview of this